Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to Synth Stuff. Today is a different video. Today I'm going to have an interview with a good friend of mine, Rob Stuart from Slave to the SQUAREwave. The reason why is today they are releasing a double album release of their greatest hits. I'm going to talk to Rob about how he got started, the synths he's used, his methods of recording, how it's changed over the years, some of the experiences he's had over the years in touring and recording, and what he hopes for with this new album, and lots of gear talk. So stay tuned.
It's never quite as good it seems in a Coca-Cola dream. Hell, I wasn't born just yesterday. What they said didn't want to know. I heard them talking about you, Joe. And even though I understand, I just don't give a damn.
All right, here is Rob. Rob, welcome to Synth Stuff. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
My pleasure, Scott.
This is a really hard thing to do, interviewing somebody who you've known very well for many years, and it's tough to ask questions you already know the answer to. But
well, that's true. But I've interviewed you as well.
That's true.
Remember the other way around? So yeah, yeah. Shoot, ask the tough questions. Go ahead.
How did you start in music in the first place? I know you came over from England when you were 14, 15?
14.
14. Had you started in music already at that point?
Well, I was forced into music. I was an avid music listener as a child. Like most music fanatics, I used to sit with my little AM/FM radio with my little earpiece in one ear while I was in bed, cover my head so my parents wouldn't catch me. So I've always loved music. But I was forced into playing something when I was in primary school in England. Everyone had to play the recorder. I remember that. And then if you had any kind of musical ability, or they thought you had musical ability, they'd pick an instrument for you, and my instrument was the violin. And I was useless. I just, at that age, it's an awkward age to play an instrument like that. And I think you either get it or you don't. I didn't get it, and I didn't grasp the whole. I mean, I played in an orchestra, but I faked it. I do what I do now. It hasn't changed. I fake music now, and I faked music then. So yeah, I have a good ear for music. So what I did back then with my violin teacher is, they'd ask me to play something. I couldn't read music. I didn't really know what was going on. I'd do a lame attempt to do it, and then the teacher would play the piece. And after I heard the teacher play the piece, I could play it back. So that was my first sort of venture into music. But yeah, I didn't appreciate it. I mean, I wish I'd kept it up, but it just wasn't my thing at the time. But I always just loved music, and I was always really attracted to weird music, like anything with electronic sounds or any kind of anything that wasn't the norm. I was attracted to. So I loved the German krautrock stuff. I loved, Pink Floyd and Kraftwerk, and those I would hear on Radio Caroline when you could pick it up, and Radio Luxembourg and things like that. So music has always just been in my DNA.
I have a parallel experience because I too was introduced to music very early and in school, but out of school as well, because I took classical piano for years. And again, I wish it's something that I had continued on with, because my keyboarding skills would be far better today if I had kept doing classical training. But yeah, I too was the one under the covers late at night with the radio and finding this weird music with synthesizers and electronics, and those are the ones that just I don't know what it was about it, but it was just a different sound, and it was a unique sound that just drew me to it, and I couldn't not listen to it.
Yeah. Getting back to your statement about, playing the piano and not practicing, I think for me anyway, this is sort of a thought I've had for a long time. The fact that I can't play anything, but I do have this weird ability to create something, I think that's what drew me to the synths, because it was this tactile thing where you could make these strange sounds, and then you get, all your little different strange sounds and put them together and make a song out of it. I think rather than being someone who was really proficient at playing the piano and reading music, I think it was sort of the other way around. The fact that I wasn't good at that, or maybe you weren't good at that, helped us create in a different way. You know,
That's
I
true.
truly believe that, because I'm still really a crappy player. I'm a one-finger guy, you know, but somehow, and I, you know, you just said it yourself, but you can put stuff together and make it sound really great, and so can I. And I think it's a big part of it is just having the ear and the patience. Patience is huge.
I think a huge amount of it is having a broad musical knowledge. You've been listening to music, you know what works, you've heard different people use different things. And even today, I'll listen to music and I'll hear something that somebody's done. I'm like, oh, I want to steal that.
Right.
And so that huge volume of, oh, I want to steal that becomes your library of tricks and things that you can use in your own music.
Oh yeah, that's that. Oh, definitely. I mean, you know, when I always say to people, like, you know, if you have writer's block or you're running out of ideas or whatever, do a cover song. You know, do a cover song. And usually, for me, that's what I do. And when I'm trying to figure out what the chords are for the song or whatever, I'll inevitably screw that up somehow, looking for the chord, and then I'll hit on an idea that becomes my own, that also has a little bit of the DNA of the cover song, and make it your own. You know, do your unique twist on it.
I think you do sell yourself short, though, because I know you did a cover of Strange Advance Worlds Away that I thought I knew that song well. And I'm pretty good at ear training. I can pick chords out, and I listened to yours, and I thought, oh, I think you, and that, I have to say, is not really, it is not a remake. You were trying to do it as accurately as possible to the original.
Look in your eyes, your world's away. Where all is lost is silence. A million miles, 1,000 minds, now worlds away.
That's right. Yeah.
And I was trying to listen to that, trying to see if there was any mistakes in there, because you'd sent it to me ahead of time before it was released. And I thought, oh, wait, that chord's wrong. I think this one's wrong. And you came back and said, no, that's how it is. And I'm like, really? And I went back and I had to listen like a few times. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's right. He did get it right, and I had it wrong. Like I said, you sell yourself short. You say you've been faking it, but you've been faking it for over 25 years. You've got a pretty huge body of work behind you.
That's true. But, you know, the tools that you and I use and everyone else uses are definitely a big part of that. I remember doing that song. It was actually for an audition for Drew Arnott of Strange Advance, when he was getting a live band together, and I decided I would put that song together as part of sort of audition to show him what I can do and come up with. And he loved it. But he's out on the West Coast and I'm in Toronto, so we didn't end up working together.
Right.
But yeah, that one I wanted to do as close to the original as possible, but beef it up a little bit, give it a bit more bottom end, because, you know, all the recordings back then were all kind of thin.
Right.
And
because of vinyl.
Yeah, exactly.
You couldn't put a lot of low end in the vinyl because you'll actually skip the needle right out of the groove. Right. That's why all the 80s music has no bottom end.
Yeah, and then also when all those albums were remastered or you know, moved over to CD, they sounded even worse the first time around. It was just awful. But that was early days, you know, to be expected, still figuring things out. But that song, I mean, you know, but I don't use MIDI at all anymore. I used to be the MIDI guy. I used to have my Fostex 8-track with my time code running Notator with a uniter plug-in next to it, and triggering all the synths and doing mixes in real time. You know, the old days, which was really fun. It was a really fun way of doing things. As I've gotten older, I haven't been able to keep up with technology in terms of the time that I have to invest to learn how to use all the software and stuff that comes out. Unlike you know all that stuff. You're amazing at that. And you retain it. I don't, because for me, again, getting back to the synths, it's all about experimentation and just sort of stumbling on something and being kind of lucky. So I stopped using MIDI, and so when I did the Strange Advance track, that was all done by hand.
A lot
Yeah,
of the time, that's how I will come up with tracks. Is I'll just mess around. I'll start with a preset, start changing it until I hear something and that just sparks something. And so many
right.
times, what I write comes out of a modified preset, and that's my process. But I don't use MIDI the way we used to, where like you were talking about, we used to have everything sequenced in MIDI, and you'd have all the synths play. I mean, technically, I could do that here still, but I never
Right.
do. And a lot of the time, I'm just playing live into my DAW, and I'm recording the MIDI into the DAW, so that if I do screw up, or if I want to, or more commonly, if I want to change something, if I want to change a key, I want to change a rhythm or something, I can just re-record it without having to remember how I played it in the first place, which may be months ago, and I don't even remember how I did it in the first place. So
So what do you have that extensive MIDI router box thing that you showed us one time? What does that accomplish for you?
that is primarily to allow so many synths to be connected to the computer at once without
Okay.
so the whole point behind all of this is that everything can be connected all the time, because there's nothing that robs creativity more than, oh wait, the MIDI's not working on this. Oh,
Right.
where's the audio? Why am I not hearing this? Why have I only got one channel? And meanwhile, you end up in a deep dive of technical troubleshooting when you're trying to write something, and then you just don't, it's gone. So instead,
Yeah.
everything works all the time. I just hit record, go play something, it automatically records, everything works always. And that was really my goal when I set up this whole studio, to work that way.
So it's rooted that you could play any of the synths in the room from wherever
Yes.
and control anything, say from
Yep.
your one. Okay.
So if I want to, I this is, my Montage M here is,
That's your
front and center.
main
That's like
board.
my main board. But if I want to play a JD 800 from it, which I do often, because the JD 800 is way back there, I can route that very easily and play the JD 800 from the Montage.
Right.
Not to mention, all the gain staging for all the different synths is done and set and stays that way. So I don't have to repatch things and regain stage, because it's each one is set for each individual synth, which is nice.
Yeah. I've got to tell your listeners or your viewers that I think you and I are polar opposites when it comes to our studio setups, because I just am not a very technical person. And again, it comes down to time. So whenever back in the old days, you'd learn your software, but I would usually learn about 5% of what it can do, because I want to create. And I never had the patience to learn everything. But you retain that information, whereas I don't. It's more experimentation for me.
Right.
Whereas you know your stuff inside out, which I totally admire. When watching your videos here on this channel, it just blows my mind what you do. It blows my mind what you did with my old synths, the way you fixed them up. I'm like, oh man, I wouldn't have sold it had I known I could have done that. But I mean, that's kind of silly too, because I'd done whatever I could with those synths at that point. That's why I could let them go.
And for those who don't know, the SH101 over there, the Juno 106, the JD 800, and the Poly 6 all came from Rob's studio, and those were the ones I did the restoration videos on. Wow.
Yeah, and not only that, you restored them, but you made them better.
Right. Yeah, I put in
amazing
kits into them and so on.
I really want my old synths to go to a good home,
right?
Because I want someone who's going to love them and appreciate them as much as I did. Because they really become, it's going to sound a bit stupid to say this, but they almost become like friends in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain that, but like you get really close and attached to them, and you just know how to get the sound that you're looking for once you really get into it, and you've had it for such a long time. And it's important for me. I mean, I even sold my Jupiter 6 a while back, and the couple that bought it from me were really, really nice. I sort of check people out before I sell them the gear, because I'm downsizing a little bit, because I'm planning to move in the future. But they paid their money for the Jupiter 6 instead of getting wedding rings, because they were getting married. So I thought that was a cute story, that the Jupiter 6 was the present to themselves rather than getting rings for their wedding. So that I thought, yeah, that's going to the right home. And that's really important to me for some reason. I don't know why.
It would be.
I just don't. I don't want someone to for you. I know you wouldn't fix it and take it and try and sell it for more.
Right.
It just wasn't a monetary thing.
Yeah.
You know, there's an appreciation for the actual equipment, which is 20, 30, 40 years old, you know.
And I did the same thing. I mean, I sold my old montage a few weeks back, and I did the same thing where I had several people who were interested, and I kind of snooped around and looked at each of the different people who were interested and picked the one that I thought would go to the best home,
Right.
you know?
Right, yeah. It's a weird thing. I don't know
Yeah.
why. But, I've always felt that with my equipment for some reason.
Between the light and the skies, for eternity's time, I'll wait for the stars to align. I will look into the heavens, and I will drift in the desert into the night that is past, or eternity's cast. If it takes forever, God knows how I love you. It's your stars that I cling to. I will hang on to hope until your love I will find. If it takes forever, if it takes the stars to align.
Going back to your startup, you started up with EDF, which is Electronic Dance Factory, which is kind of a Electronic Dream Factory,
Yeah.
which is sort of a studio / music project / bin that you use whenever you need it.
Yeah, so that's been the name of my studio for the longest time, as well as the name of those musical projects. But if you want to go before that, so when I first came to Canada, I had some neighbors that I met who were into the same kind of music as I was into, which was really bizarre because, you know, I was listening to some pretty strange stuff. And we started our first electronic band back then in 1980. And we were called the Plastic Omniums. And which was, one day I was leaning on the pole at the bus stop, and there was a garbage can on the pole. I was waiting for the bus to come by. And the actual garbage can was called a Plastic Omnium. And I thought, hey, that's kind of a cool name, the Plastic Omniums. You know, maybe the music was garbage, maybe there was some meaning in that. Anyway, so I hooked up with these couple of guys, and that was our first band. And I remember doing a show in our high school. You know how they used to have the Battle of the Bands and all that kind of stuff. And this high school I was going to was pretty big compared to where I came from in England. I had a full auditorium, you know, that full setup. And all these bands went on stage and played all their Rush covers and their, you know, Led Zeppelin, all the sort of standard stuff that everyone did. And we got on stage. We had 3 synths, a drum machine, and a reel-to-reel deck. And we were standing there kind of like Kraftwerk, very motionless.
Depeche Mode, yeah.
That kind of thing. And we did a Gary Newman cover. We did a Kraftwerk cover. And then we did one of our own songs. And it was really interesting to watch the kids or listen to the kids. And I still have the recording of this show. The cool kids loved it. And the rocker type kids just hated it. So there was booing and cheering at the same time. It was pretty funny. At the time, we didn't understand that. But I think back to it, it was pretty funny. But yeah, that was 1980. And we had a CR78. Wow. I had a Yamaha SK10 string machine. We had an ARP Odyssey and an SH09.
Wow.
And we were triggering the SH09 with the trigger output from the CR78. Mm-hmm. And then the reel-to-reel was doing sound effects and stuff. And then, unfortunately, our friendships all fell apart. And at that point, I'd started buying my own gear. And the reason why I bought my own gear was because, you know, studio time was just impossible to pay for at that age. And I thought, well, you know, I'll just start buying my own equipment and figure it all out myself. So like you, I'm a self-taught engineer. I guess most people are these days. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my stuff just came out of trial and error. As equipment developed and changed through the 80s and 90s, you try to keep up with the different format changes and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So it was pretty difficult.
I did the same thing as you. There's no way I could afford to book studio time. So started out with even just cassette decks and bouncing
Right.
tracks back and forth,
Yeah.
and then graduated up to a 4-track, which was just a miracle. And you could,
Miracle. Yeah.
but same thing. You always started with the bass line first because you knew it was going to descend into a pit of hiss with no top end. So you do the low end first, because each time you bounce it, you lose more and more top end. And it's a real technique to do recording on limited analog tape.
Yeah, and again, I talk about this a lot to a lot of my friends. That the limitations made me anyway much more creative.
Yep.
Because you had to figure out ways of doing this stuff. You couldn't lock things up together. You couldn't do this and the other. You didn't want to bounce too much because of what you were just talking about.
Yep.
I did start bouncing things a little bit when pulse code modulation, the PCM digital decks came out.
Mm-hmm.
I did start taking my 4 tracks, doing a stereo mix and bringing it back in, and that was kind of cool. But it was difficult to keep up with the technology changes around that time because it was just so quick and fast. And of course, when you do your music and you're serious about it, you want it to sound the best. You want to sound professional like everyone else. But, who could afford a Lexicon reverb back then,
And
It was
expensive compressors and you always wanted it to sound like, wow, listen to this album. It sounds so great. Why doesn't mine sound like that? And there was always that quest to figure out what they were doing. And of course, then, it's because they're using a $10,000 compressor on the mastering and
on a super expensive vintage microphone.
Yeah, exactly.
In a dead room and, adding all these great reverbs and delays. Yeah. So it was difficult, but that was the challenge, I think, that we all accepted, is that, let's see what I can get out of this mediocre equipment,
right?
And it just, over time, it just developed from there.
So you started with EDF, and that was kind of your own project / studio. And then how did Slave begin?
So EDF,
I should say Slave, but I call it Slave because everybody calls it Slave. But for people who are watching, they're gonna, what the hell is it? Slave to the SQUAREwave is Rob's band.
So EDF was asked by this really weird dude who called himself Weasel Lizard. He was like something out of The Hobbit, this guy. He had a strange earthy smell about him. He looked kind of like a hobbit. He was a very friendly, nice chap. He was actually a film editor, I think. And somehow he got a hold of my music and invited me over to his place, and we met. And then he said, "Oh, I DJ on the side too, and I organize raves and stuff." So he put this rave together out in Oakville, and he asked if I'd go play there. And at the time, I was working on a film soundtrack with Terry Gowan, who was Lawrence Gowan's younger sibling. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And Terry was going to help me, so it wouldn't just be me standing there with my gear. So I think, if I remember, we were using a DAT tape for backing tracks and just playing on top of the DAT tape at the time. But at that supposed rave, where only about 10 people showed up. It was a really busy weekend in Toronto, so there was something happening in Molson Park. There was other gigs happening. It was crazy to do that weekend because everyone was doing other things. Anyway, it was there that I met Colin Troy, who was doing his Smoking Jehovah thing, which was a East Indian techno-y kind of cool thing he was doing. And we just met, and because we had so much time on our hands, because nothing was really happening at this rave, we just started talking and found out that we had a mutual interest for the same type of music. So we found out that we lived pretty close to each other, so we got together and just listened to each other's tapes and demos and things like that, and this started working, and that was 25 years ago. And
then the first real big track you came out with was just a stunner.
You're talking Hopeless Believers?
Yeah.
Yes, I am a dreamer. Yes, we are a song. Got never comes.
Troy brought to the table quite a few good tracks that he had started, but he wasn't a finisher. He couldn't finish anything, and I'm the finisher. So he'd bring in some things like Summertown was a cool bed that he put together, and then I finished it off, and it came together nice. So yeah, Hopeless Believers was one of the first that we wrote together, and that sort of wrote itself in about an hour. And still one of my favorite songs. It's one of those songs, just 4 chords all the way through.
It's so simple, and yet it's so good. And I've sat and listened to it, and I'm like, why is this song so good?
Well, I think part of that is because for me, it includes my favorite combination of sounds, which is acoustic guitar with synths. There's something about those two. They work so well together. And if you listen to bands like New Music, say for example, the first New Music album, From A to B or whatever it's called, he always has that acoustic, that 12-string sound with synths backing him up, and that mixture, that combination somehow it's magical. And we did that in that song. I'm not sure why we chose an acoustic. It just happened that way. Like I said, it happened very quickly.
And I know you and I are the same in that we concentrate on the music, and the lyrics and the meaning of the song is completely lost to us. I struggle to even know what most songs are about. I'll play something for my wife, and she'll say, "Oh, that's really nice. I really love it because he's talking about this." I'm like, I didn't even get that. I didn't even listen to the lyrics. I'm listening to the bass line and how they fit the mix together.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Yeah.
But that said, Colin did just a masterful job on both the lyrics and the performance on that song, and I think it really elevates it.
Yeah, I remember we actually sent out that song to a bunch of different record labels at the time when labels still existed, and we got a few comments back saying that the lyrics weren't relevant to the times, for whatever, something along those lines. And the fact that being in our 30s, we were too old to even consider trying to get a record deal, and all those barriers are broken down now, but those were other things that you had to deal with as well. Sure. If you were 30, you were too old for the business. Tell that to Carl Hyde, to Underworld, to those guys in Underworld. I think they're probably in their mid-60s, those guys. And they're still playing massive stadiums, right?
Yep.
So those rules are all
putting out
broken
material
now.
Continually. They just
put continually.
Last week, new track. Of course, it's more than just the studio work. I mean, there's a ton of studio work for Slave, but then you develop this live show that's got a real following as well. Yeah.
So let me just backtrack a little bit. So back then, when I did the first Slave album, I just got my first digital recording program, which was called SAW, Software Audio Workshop. And I'd been in other bands. I was in another 80s band, who was kind of known in Toronto, called Vis-a-Vis. And I remember being in a studio with them, and we wanted to do one more track, and we were running out of time. We were running out of tape. So what we did is we did this song at half speed, and we had one chance to get it right. And at the end of the song, the drummer does a big drum fill, and he hits the mic instead of the cymbal. And I remember playing that song to people after, saying, like, coughing when he hit the cymbal mic. He did it a couple of times actually, and just feeling so embarrassed and kind of dumb that we let that go. So I made a promise to myself that when I do my own music and release it, it's going to be as perfect as it can be. So yes, we had written Hopeless Believers, we'd written Summertown. Once we had a whole chunk of songs ready to go, we decided we were going to put an album together, and then once that was coming together, we wanted to play it live. So live was important for us. And at that time too, when I did go out live, keyboards weren't a thing. So I'm a keyboard player, with my synths out there, but people weren't into keyboards. It was a strange time.
So you talk about FAFs. I was speaking with Martin Page, who is a famous producer now, who did Q Feel back in the 80s
Right.
and Dancing in Heaven. And there's always been a bit in there, and you can tell it's all played live, but where the keyboardist is doing a solo, and you can hear a wrong note hit, and they
Right.
just let it go. I asked him about. I said I heard that once back in the late '80s, and I can't unhear it. Every time I hear the song, I hear that bad note. He's like, "Me too." He says it drives me nuts. He says, "But what can you do? It was all played live."
And it's nowadays it's just so easy to fix something like that too, right?
Yep.
Whereas back then, I mean, even if you were able to cut the tape somehow, it would be a difficult thing to do. But let me tell you a bit about the viewpoint we had on live shows. So before we got the live band together, or we were ready to play live, we went out in Toronto to a bunch of different nightclubs to check out what bands were up to. And we made some observations, and those observations were mostly that the bands that were playing, they dressed like shit. They come on stage with their work clothes. They'd never talk to the audience. There was no feedback between the band and the audience. So it was the tail end of the whole grunge thing, right? So it changed a lot of things. And there was no signage telling you who the band was or who you were listening to. So right away we said, okay, let's go back to basics. We'll wear black suits, white shirts, black skinny tie. So we look like a cohesive unit on stage, right? That's going way back, when everyone had suits. Then we got ourselves a giant banner that we put up at every show that said "Slave to the SQUAREwave." And we made it a point to include the audience, because we figured if someone's going to take the time to come down to a show, pay the money, stand there waiting for the opening band, all that kind of stuff, we want to make sure that they come down and have a good time and they're entertained. So I'm not sure how the Boxhead thing came up.
There you go.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the original Boxhead that Colin Troy came up with as a character on stage. And at the time he was married to a lady and he had a couple of kids. This is before he came out. So his life, his viewpoint, his life was, he had this suburban life that he was living. I'm not going to call it a lie, but he was living a different life. Sure. And when he became this guy on stage, he got out of his box. When he took his box head off his head, he became this rock star. And at the end of the show, he'd grab the box and put it back on, and he went back to his retreated suburban life. That's how that character came about. But yeah, we wanted to entertain. So we entered a contest. It's a really long way of getting to the Germany thing. And we won this Battle of the Bands contest, and we ended up playing in Germany in this beautiful little town called Rottenburg. We won this thing. We flew to Germany. At that time, we were a 5-piece band because we had a live bass player. It was a battle of the bands, so basically all the bands play, and there are judges that check out the bands. I should say this was a huge festival, so there was hundreds of thousands of people that were camping out for the weekend in the farmers' fields, would come down to watch the shows, and there was 2 stages at either end of the field. It was the main stage and the stage that we played on. And it was a pretty big stage itself. It was amazing monitoring, some of the best monitoring we've ever had. So we did our show at midnight. We did our half hour, and just by chance.
But you promoed a lot ahead of time, though.
Oh, we were promoting like crazy. That's another thing that no other band was doing at the time. You want people to know who you are. You want, at least if you put all that work in, you want people to check you out and at least have the chance to make a decision whether they like you or not.
And then you had the T-shirts, which I think somebody later ripped off, but you had a lot of people with was it SQUAREhead or
yeah. We actually had 3 or 4 different designs, and we took a whole bunch. We ended up giving most of them away at the end, really. But we related to the Boxhead character that I was just talking about. We did like a smiley face, but instead of a round one, it was square.
That's right.
And afterwards, we ended up touring around Florida a little bit. We met John Bon Jovi's brother, who worked for him. I think they had their own label, and he would scout bands. And anyway, we gave him one of these T-shirts that had the Boxhead, and that ended up being the next Bon Jovi album cover. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, ideas stolen. Back to Germany. Yeah, so we went on stage at midnight, and this was during the 2003 summer heat wave in Europe. So it was, in the daytime, it was 45 degrees. And I had to watch some of these bands performing on stage with the sun on them, with this humid, hot air at 45 degrees. And they were killing it. But man, they were losing pints of sweat. You know, luckily we played at midnight. It was cooler. And a band had just finished playing the main stage at the other end of the field before we came on. So there was a huge crowd down there. And just by chance, they happened to walk up to our stage just as we were coming on. And we had an intro piece of music that we always do. That's another thing. We have intro, little cool introductions. So that came on and that drew people over. So we had a massive crowd. And we didn't end up winning the thing. Everyone thought we were going to win it. But as it happened, the whole thing was just kind of a scam. But it was fun.
So 25 years on, and you have 2 albums coming out today. So talk about how that came about.
Well, I had been thinking, Colin and I actually had been thinking about putting out a greatest hits album for a long time. Not that we have a lot of albums, but we have a lot of songs.
Yeah.
You know, like when you're streaming now, you have unlimited amount of tunes that you can post up there. But
you have not a huge amount of albums, but there's not filler on those albums. There's so many good songs on there. So I don't know how you managed to cut it down to what you did. And there's literally hours of music in these albums.
Well, yeah, it's a bit obnoxious actually, because I couldn't cut it down the way any sort of greatest hits package would be, like 10 or 15 songs. So I decided to split it up into 2 albums, with one being sort of down-tempo, chill ballads and all that kind of stuff, because we did a lot of those. And then the other stuff being all the rocky dance stuff. So I made 2 best of albums. But there's still, I think all told, I think there's 64 songs between the 2. And a lot of them I took the opportunity, because I have all the master recordings and the mixes. I reloaded a whole whack of the tunes and reworked some of them and cleaned them up, because some of those songs are 25 years old now.
Sure.
So they sounded a bit outdated, I guess.
And you have better mastering skills today.
Well, I have
You
better
learn.
mastering. Yeah, I have a better mastering software, I think is what it is. You know, like Ozone 10 and 11, they're still pretty complicated to learn. And again, I don't put enough time into learning how to do it properly. My whole thing is just hit and miss. I just do it until it sounds good to my ears, my old, dying, bleeding ears.
You sent me the albums to listen to a couple of weeks ago, and I was really surprised at how good it sounded in terms of audio quality. And then some of the songs had just been reworked entirely, almost remixes. And I was surprised that I think there was 1 or 2 songs that I didn't identify on there. I'm like, wow, I really know all these songs, and they're all just such good songs.
No more kings, no more queens, no more James Didion dreams, no more defiantly dealing as rebels. Ain't no fistful of fury, ain't no last man be standing. They've all been betrayed. Hey. Avenue, we were lovers of St. Avenue, Avenue.
I thought, what better way to be introduced to? I mean, I've done that so many times in the past where I don't know a band and I hear one song and I'm like, oh, that's a great song, and then I'll see they have a greatest hits, and I'll buy the greatest hits album because that will be the introduction to the best of their work.
Right.
And this is really a good representation of your work, and there's not a bad song in there, which is really kind of incredible as to when you think about how many there are.
Well, that's very nice of you to say so. Again, you know, I'm proud of what I do and what I've accomplished in my songs. And again, I won't release a song. And I tell this to any younger musician or producer that I talk to, is just don't put it out if you don't feel it's good enough. you know. And there are some songs on the album that I look back on now and I go, I think I kind of jumped the gun on that a bit, but you get excited.
Yeah,
You
I've got a
want
few
people
of
to hear
those.
it, and you experiment and you change your sound and you change your equipment and you change your way of working because of that equipment. And so it's sometimes difficult. Now you've got platforms to release your own music on, so everyone's doing it. Back then, I mean, I remember I had a band in the 80s called Ear Candy, and I remember how excited we were to put out a vinyl record, EP. You know, it was actual product, but then, you know, again, back then, you're going, okay, now I've got 1,000 of these vinyl discs. What do I do with them? You know, whereas now you can instantaneously, and I guess that's good and bad. Getting back to my earlier point that because you can just put this stuff up instantaneously when you've done it, you might not be putting your best work up there, but you're excited about it because it's something that's
Sure.
driven
I
you.
mean,
You
we
know,
get to the other end now where we have people running an AI program that spits out some kind of thing in key of F sharp major at 120 BPM, 4 minutes long, and they're putting that up just because over, you know, if they put out thousands and thousands, eventually some of it's going to generate some streaming revenue somewhere.
is that what's happening?
Yeah, it has been happening, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's. I mean, it's obviously it's just crap, but
Well,
the current.
I think it's an interesting concept to do that. I mean, you know, every new bit of technology, that kind of thing happens. Look what happened with sampling.
Mhm.
You know, it's kind of the same thing. Everyone can afford a sampler at some point, and they're sampling everyone else's records and just rapping on top of it or doing whatever they do. And you know, it gets watered down after a while as the next great
Well,
thing comes along. You know,
I think what happens is the next big thing comes along, everybody jumps on it, and it sounds great, and then people get sick of hearing it, and it goes
mm-hmm.
away.
Yeah, yeah, like Skrillex.
Right.
Skrillex, like remember how he sort of came in and he was the new thing and he's doing all this stuff and it didn't last that long. What was that sound called again? I just mean his musical genre. What
Yeah,
did
yeah,
they
yeah.
call that? I can't remember.
It's
But there's so many subgenres, and that's another thing I cannot keep up with is the genres
I
of
don't even
music
try.
and the subgenres and all that stuff. There's so
I
many.
hate when I have to when I'm publishing a track and it wants me to classify, you know, what genre is
Right,
your music? I'm like, I don't know. I just put it in generic electronics. I don't know. And
yeah,
it has a bunch of subgenres. I'm like, I don't even know what any of these are or what they sound like. How can I pick
right,
one of these? And
yeah.
that's how they're pushing it out to people is because people are saying I subscribe to this subgenre, and if you don't pick the right one, it doesn't get heard. I hate it.
You know, again, getting to equipment and things changing so quickly, I stopped falling into that trap for me personally because it just got too expensive trying to keep up and upgrading and you know format changes and stuff. I couldn't keep up with it. It was too much. So I've been using the same piece of software for about 15 years now for my recording and looping and all that kind of stuff. And for my synths, even though I've still got a whole whack of them around me, my iPad has become my go-to machine now with the iOS apps that are just incredible. I mean, you were talking about patches and
Hmm.
originality and, you know, tweaking things and making them your own. I don't even do that anymore because there's so many patches that are great. You know, yes, I'll mess with it a little bit, but there's so many amazing sounds out there now. And I've always been the kind of person that has no problem committing to a sound for the track. So I'll find that sound, put it on. If it works with the song, I'll record it and leave it in, you know.
I'm pretty much the same. It's fairly rare where I'll have a track that's well developed and I'm thinking, wow, that bass line I put in there, it really doesn't sit well with everything else. Let me try a different sound for that. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of times that's happened. So I'm pretty much the same.
Right. But as you know, I use loops a lot. I love working with loops. And I, you know, obviously customize them and cut them up. But sometimes there's a loop that works great with the song, but doesn't have the right sound, or has the right sound and doesn't have the right part. And that's where the challenge comes in again to cut that thing up and make it work. And I love doing that. I love again, that's sort of going back to the old way of saying, okay, this isn't exactly right, but let's see what we can do to make it work in the song. And I find that a real fun thing to work with. You know, a lot of people don't like loops. They think it's cheating or whatever, but I always say use whatever tools are available, and it comes down to the song. The song speaks for itself. Right?
True, but you have such a vast collection of loops, and some of them are such high quality loops. Whenever you put a song out, I'm listening and I'm thinking, and I try to always guess which is the loop, or did he have somebody come in and play guitar on this? And I almost always guess wrong. Every time I think it's a live player, it's a loop, and I'm really surprised at what you do with the loops.
Yeah, I mean, with a loop, you run the risk of someone else using that same loop on something. But I stopped worrying about that kind of thing a long time ago. You know, you can set your song up in a different key, a different tempo, where the loop isn't even noticeable from one song to the next.
Sure.
But yeah, and I think that's why I stopped using MIDI, to be honest. Like when looping came out and the technology was there, it changed things for me. All of a sudden I could do everything, and now MIDI wasn't really important. And now it was just a matter of either making your own loops or getting your hands on some loop sample packs. And the stuff that Soundforge and Sony were putting out originally there were some good stuff there. You know, when I put a song together, it's not all loops. It has been sometimes, but I'll add all my textures and sounds and things from my other things. So it's just a tool. But it's a great writing tool.
The most common use for me is real live drums, because I can't. I'm not a drummer. I can program in some fills and things, but that groove with the organic feel of fills and things you can only get from a human drummer, and the only way I'm going to have that is through loops. So that's if you hear live drums on mine, that's you pretty much guaranteed it's a loop.
Right. You know, there's usually I'll start on a song and I'll just put my program into a loop mode of 8 bars and just start auditioning sounds and come up with about 20 or 30 sounds that work together. And then once I'm happy with those, I'll start arranging. And it kind of grows organically from there, just based on the loops and the sounds, and then add the enhancements. And I would come up with something pretty well finished in terms of a musical bed, and then send that off to Colin. I set him up with the same program. And so he would upload it. And then, during COVID, for example, he did his vocals at home for the first time. And that 2020 album, our last album, half of the vocals he recorded himself. But it worked out pretty good because we were on the same platform,
Sure.
All right, one last question.
Yep.
You ask, and I'll ask.
Okay.
What's your favorite synth?
I gotta say, I hate when people ask this. Okay, so it really depends on what you're talking about. For pure synthesis, I love the Hydrosynth.
Right.
It really allows creativity in sound design, and it has the best user interface for doing sound design, and you can do absolutely anything on it. If there's a sound that you've heard a synthesizer make, pretty much guaranteed that you can get it out of the Hydrosynth. But for everyday working, like when I'm actually recording and working and I need a lot of different sounds, I use the Montage.
Well, that thing's a monster.
That's it. And with the new ANX engine, which is a virtual analog synth, which is what you just heard there, it brings back, like your old CSX Yamaha. It has all that old Yamaha virtual analog, but with all the current processing and computing capability of this synth, and a lot more stuff in it that you can do to modify it. So it can do a lot of what the Hydrosynth can. It's not quite as easy to create sounds. The user interface is not, because it's a user interface that's designed for this huge workstation. It's not dedicated to doing like on the Hydrosynth is, but you can get amazing sounds out of it. And I think part of that is because I know it so well, because I have a Phantom down here as well that is certainly somewhat as capable as the montage, but I just don't know it as well as the montage. So it's kind of my go-to.
Right. Well, I'm old school. My favorite synth is one of the ones I sold, actually. And it was hard to get rid of, but it's always been the Jupiter 6 for me.
Really?
Always, yeah. Just the look of it with the metal sides. You know, of course, it's the little baby brother of the Jupiter 8, but it had a sound, man.
It has its own sound. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was great. I used to do a lot of industrial music. It was great for that. That combined with the JD 800 for industrial music was killer.
Yeah.
And an MS-20 I used to have as well. And that, you know, run that through a distortion pedal or overdrive it or whatever, put some phasers on it. Killer.
The JD 800, when you play through the presets, you can like, you hit this preset. I'm like, oh, I know that was in this song and this song. And the more you get to know the presets in it, and the more you listen to music from, you know, especially the early 90s, you hear that thing everywhere.
Yeah. That thing was a monster for the time. Yeah, so the Jupiter 6.
So what's the hope for these two new albums? And I know it's really hard to say the names. One's dub. It's almost like the Underworld dub no bass with my head, man.
Well, that's exactly where I stole it from.
Yeah.
So it's just I couldn't, because the songs are so varied in their styles. I just went, okay, what kind of genre? We were just talking genres. Yep. What kind of genre are these songs attached to? So the chill out one is called ambient down tempo chill out soul, but it's broken up,
right? Like
the Underworld thing, like Dubno, like you just mentioned. And then the more rocky one is called electro dark wave synth funk rock. And it's tough coming up with titles, you know.
Yeah, it's a pretty a very good description of what you're going to hear.
I think so. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. I really don't know what the goal is, honestly. Like, you put your music out there and you hope for the best.
One day to the next, take the test. He's a model citizen, somehow be the best. Why confess? She's a model citizen, stand up and deny. It's your right, be a model citizen, make it with a smile. You'll be fine, we're all model citizens.
I stopped doing music I wanted to make a living from music most of my life. But in my 40s, I sort of made a decision, well, that's obviously not going to happen. Because I was angry and frustrated. And my wife wasn't keen on me. So I made a decision in my 40s to just change that whole attitude and do music for the love of doing music and the love of creativity and all that kind of stuff. And ever since I made that decision, I've just done it purely for fun and a creative output. And it makes me happy. Yeah. And it keeps me sane. You know, music has always kept me sane. It's always given me goals. It's always given me relationships like ours. You know, I've met most of my great friends through music, connections. And when you do it for fun, it changes everything.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know, I have one or two projects going on. I'll have, work and YouTube videos, and I got the airplane builds and then synthesizer related work that I do. And so I've got so much going on and stress. And then I'll sit down and I'm like, you know what? Today is going to be a non-work. I'm just going to sit down and create something. And it grounds you and centers you. And when I've come out the end of it, even if I don't have something that I'm going to put out, it's something that I've created, and it's hard to describe. I feel better at the end of it, simply for having putting creativity into something that may not ever see the light of day, but I've done something, I've created something. Yeah,
but you're kind of bringing on that stress yourself, though, because you choose to do these things, but they earn you a living.
Yeah.
Which is why you do these videos. You've got, the stuff with your plane plus you've got your full-time job, and then you've got a life to live as well. So,
Right.
so that's a choice that you make, but it's what you do. You're a content creator, right?
Yep.
So it's my choice is to, yeah, I create content, but I don't make a living from it like someone like you would, you know.
And to be sure, I make piddling amount of money off YouTube videos. I mean, it's not zero, but it's definitely not worth my time. So this is definitely a labor of love, and it's simply because I want to share things, and I enjoy the interaction with the people that watch the videos. And I end up learning a lot because I'll say something like, here's this, here's this synthesizer, it does that, and somebody will write, it's like, have you tried this? I'm like, oh no, I haven't. Or somebody will say, I'm trying to do this. How do I get this sound? I'm like, how would I get that sound? Then I'll try it out. So it kind of like drives both ways, and that's where this really comes from. I don't see this as a source of income, although it generates, a tiny amount. But
but it's you said it's a labor of love, which it is, and it brings a community together, and I love that. I love a community of people who are into electronic music and synthesizers and the meat and potatoes of what's inside a synth, or what can be done, or how it can be fixed or modified. It's all interesting stuff to me. I really enjoy it. So, thanks for doing this stuff, because I love watching it. As soon as your video pops up, I get a thing. I'm right there, even with your airplane one.
The main reason I wasn't going to do a channel for and I'm talking, anybody who doesn't know this, I have a YouTube channel called Canard Boulevard where I just do all the stuff about my airplane. And I really wasn't planning on doing one. But when I bought the airplane, the owner says, "Are you going to do a YouTube channel on it?" I'm like, "Not really." He's like, "Well, you really should, because I'd love to see." I'm like, "Fine, I'll throw up a couple of videos of flying around." But it got instant response. People loved what I was doing. I'm like, "Oh, great! Now another YouTube channel." So basically, when I just throw a camera in when I go flying, and if it comes out with something usable, then hey, it's a video. Right now, it's mostly me working on it and fixing it, but
but you also do everything yourself.
Well, that's true, and part of the reason why I decided to do that is because a lot of what I was learning came from other YouTube videos, and there's not a huge amount of content out for this particular type of airplane. So I thought, well, if I'm going through this, then maybe other people who are building this airplane or thinking about flying this airplane will learn something, and then they can refer to my videos. And that's exactly what happened, because this is a kit airplane, and there's a lot of people who are building it who have contacted me and said, your videos have given me drive to get my project finished, because I want to get to be able to do all the stuff you're doing, or hey, I have the same landing gear and I have the same problem as yours. Thanks for showing that, because now I know how to fix mine. That kind of stuff. So it's.
Well, you know what's happened.
What's that?
This has taken over from your Goldwing site.
Yes,
right.
Definitely.
So by extension, it's just now you're talking about planes. But when you did your Goldwing thing, like you were doing the same thing.
And that's exactly that. I was working on my own Goldwing motorcycle, and I have a YouTube video channel called Goldwing Docs. I would post on the forum, the Goldwing Docs forum, about here's how I fix things, or I'd have people asking me repeatedly how do I fix this. So I was like, well, I'll just create a video to show them. And it wasn't intended to be a channel. It was just a place I could throw a video that I could show these people, and it kind of just grew from there. But yeah, eventually there was nothing else wrong with the bike, and I had nothing to fix. So I couldn't really make any more videos. So.
The other cool thing with you creating your own content with these sites is that you create your own music to put on the videos too.
Yep.
So you're pulling everything together. It's clever. It works well. You do a great job, and thanks for doing all that work for us.
Well, I appreciate you taking all this time out of your day to talk. I did say I wanted to make sure that we promoted the album, because if you have not heard Slave the Square Wave, and I'm going to assume that most of the people watching this channel have not, because it's a local Toronto band, you really should check out Slave the Square Wave and the new 2 albums, which Rob will now say because I can't remember the names.
Ambient, down-tempo, chill-out soul, electro, dark, wave, synth, funk, rock.
And I'll put links to both those albums in the comments section below. It has, it'll be on all the typical streaming services and all the places where you get music.
Yeah. Plus Bandcamp, if people want wave files. Or...
Absolutely. Anybody on this channel knows that Bandcamp is the place where you want to go, because Spotify pays 1/10 of a cent per stream, and Bandcamp actually you actually make something from it.
Yeah. Again, I mean, it's nice when someone does buy it, but it's not about the money.
Right.
Yeah.
True.
But it's nice. Help pay some of the bills.
And it's a really good representation of what Slave the Square Wave has done in the past in 25 years, and it's an impressive catalog. All right, I guess
thank you.
I guess we're done.
Again, thank you for doing your channel and for informing us and keeping us all up to date with what's going on.
All right, thanks, Rob. Thanks for talking.
Okay, Scott.
The time.
All right,
we'll talk to you again soon.
Have fun cutting that.
All right.
See ya.
See ya. That's it for today's video. I really want to thank Rob for taking the time out of his day to talk to me and introduce you, hopefully, to this great band, Slave the Square Wave, and along with my cat, who didn't appreciate me trying to put drops in her eyes a few minutes ago. I'm covered in fur. In any case, if you haven't checked out Slave the Square Wave before, I'm going to put links in the description below, as well as in the comments section, to the new double albums. I encourage you, just take a few hours out of your day, leave them playing in the background, get to know this fantastic band. Rob is really humble. He's an extremely talented songwriter. This massive body of work really speaks for itself. Some high quality music that really should have hit the big time and never did. If you liked the video and you want to see more like it, click like and subscribe. It really helps me out when you do that. If you have any comments or questions on this video, leave them in the comment section below. I'll answer, and I'm sure Rob will as well. He'll be trolling through the comments here. Thanks for watching.
Was it worth the sacrifice?